The dead reader had been sitting on Yara's shelf for 4 months, casing taped at one seam, doing the one thing it was good for now, which was nothing, and she had stopped looking at it the way you stop looking at a grave you walk past every day. Then buoy 6 developed a cough, and she started looking at it again. Yara Haddad had tended Reach Relay Arc 9 for 4 years in sum, and in that time she had learned the chain the way you learn a person you live alone with, by sound, by habit, by the small wrongnesses that mean something is starting to go. Buoy 6's cough was not 4's cough. 4 had a flutter she had named and tolerated, and in the end, nearly lost the whole arc over. 6 was steadier than 4 had ever been. A good clean heart out past the dogleg, nearer the dark than she liked any of her buoys to be. But 4 mornings running now, its keep alive had come in a hair wide, a hair slow, the gap between beats stretching where it should have held. She knew that stretch. She had watched it kill a buoy's clock before. It was the start of drift. The can smelled the way it always smelled. Hot electronics. And under that, the sour edge of a recycler filter she had been promised a replacement for 2 supply runs ago. She sat with the chipped enamel mug going cold at her elbow and the status boards washing the curved bulkhead in instrument amber, and she did the arithmetic she already knew the answer to. Drift was a clock problem. A clock problem had exactly one fix, and she had used it. 4 months ago, she had saved buoy 4 by finding the thing the whole inherited network kept its time to, a slow, faint, perfectly regular pulse under every keep alive, the deep timing, the conductor that had been conducting since before the reach existed, and retiming a healthy buoy into a metronome of it, loud enough for a deaf old clock circuit to catch the beat again. To do that, she had needed to hear the pulse, and the only instrument that had ever heard it was the salvaged Vask reader married into the guts of the spike, and she had run it at full gain for hours holding 4's phase lock by hand, and it had cooked exactly the way the spike's predecessor had warned it would, exactly the way the makers of these things apparently built them to. She had not thrown it in the scrap bin. She had set it on the shelf, taped seam and all, where she could see it. She told herself that was sentiment. It was not sentiment. It was that a Reach journeyman did not get a Vask reader twice. The replacement queue for an inherited buoy was years. The queue for an off-register salvage Vask analyzer component was never, because it was not a thing the Reach admitted she had. She had filed the EP8 save the way she filed everything. Accurate, complete, and silent about the part that mattered. Buoy 4 relocked after clock drift, reference reacquired by local repeater, 1 analyzer component lost to thermal overrun in the course of the work. Every word of it true. None of it the truth, which was that she had found the thing the makers used to keep time, and that the thing had skipped a beat while she listened, and that she had kept the only recording in her boot instead of the Reach archive. She had even written at the bottom of the report, in the box for remarks, the network maintains a timing reference not described in current documentation. Ask me officially. Nobody had asked. Frontier reports went up the chain into a silence as deep as the hush, and that most days suited her fine. So here was the shape of it, clean and ugly. Buoy 6 was drifting. Below 7 sound buoys, the Reach decertified the arc and quarantined the lot, and she went home. To save 6, she needed to hear the reference. To hear the reference, she needed a reader. And there was no reader, and no buying one. And the one she'd had was 4 months dead on a shelf an arm's length from her hand. She had a thing she could do about that. She had been not doing it for 4 months, too. There was a young Vask runner named Ress who had burned blind out of the hush on Yara's count, 2 years and 1 buoy ago, and had said a thing to her across a dying channel that she had filed somewhere she didn't open often. You answered. The Accord did not. I burn on your count. In Vask terms, that was not a thank you. Yara had done enough subcontracting with Vask crews to know roughly what it was. A Vask who decided to trust a non-Vask read it as a debt, owed to that person, specifically, not transferable, not symbolic, not the kind of thing you let lie. Ress had left a way to be reached. Ress, who ran thin routes along the dead zone edge with cargo that didn't love checkpoints, knew people who moved salvage that no register ever saw. She had not called. Calling meant spending the thing Rest carried for her, and you did not spend a Vask's trust on a favor, the way you'd hit up a contact for a part. And she could be honest with herself out here. There was no one to perform for. Calling meant a person in the can. After 4 years of buoys, a person in the can. She looked at Six's Keep Alive coming in a hair wide. She looked at the dead reader. She keyed the off-register set she was not supposed to have and sent on the dumbest, most stubborn signal she owned, in the oldest code there is, a heading, a name, and the word help, which she had never once sent on her own behalf. Rest came in 5 days, which meant Rest had not been far, which Yara decided not to think too hard about. The ship that clamped onto the can's spare ring was a runner ship, patched, fast, registry-shy, the kind of hull that had been 3 other ships. The Vask who came through the lock was taller than Yara remembered the voice being, longer in the torso and shorter in the limb than any human. The heavy shoulder yoke filling the hatch, a densely quilled pelt across the back gone to short fur at the hands and the long-jawed face. There were more kin marks on the jaw than there had been across a telegraph 2 years ago. Still young, but marked now, where the marks are earned. Slung across the back, in a worn grip strap, was an inherited line wrench. Yara knew without being told that it had a name.
You sent help.
I sent a heading and a name and help. You came on help.
You sent help to me. Once you counted me out of a dark place. A person does not send that word to a person they counted out of the dark and have it mean a part order.
Yara had meant to ease into it. She gestured at the dead reader on the shelf instead, because Rest had already seen it, was already looking at it the way you look at a body.
I have a buoy dying of the same thing the last one nearly died of. I fixed the last one by hearing a sound only that could hear. It's dead. There's no other one. The Reach won't have a new one for years, and they'd never give me that anyway because officially I never had it.
Rest crossed the can in 3 steps, which in a space that size was most of it, and crouched at the shelf and did not touch the reader. A long, deliberate, vast quiet.
This was made by my people. Not bought. Made. The makers of it are gone, like the makers of all of it. But the making, the pattern of it, that is not gone. That my people kept.
You're telling me there's a spare?
I am telling you, there is no spare. I am telling you, there is a knowing of how the pattern goes. Carried, the way we carry, in a thing with a name.
Rest reached back and brought the line wrench around into the amber light and held it across both shorter arms the way you'd hold something heavier than it was.
This is Hesk. To build you a thing that hears your sound, I must take Hesk apart down to where the knowing lives. And you must hear whose grief it is first. Because Hesk is not a wrench. Hesk is a name. And the name is owed a hearing before the metal is owed a use.
They did not start with the metal. That was the thing Yara would think about afterward. That the Vask way of building a thing started with a death. Rest sat on the fold-down bunk with Hesk laid across both knees and told her, in short-weighted clauses with the long Vask pauses between them, what Hesk was. Not a tool a runner had bought, a line wrench out of a hold that did not exist anymore. Not a hold that died the way holds were dying now, thinned and given away keel by keel, but one that had gone into a quiet place a long time ago and not come back out. A whole small fleet cluster. Rest's 3 generations up. The line wrench was the only object that had been outside the cluster when it went in, because a child too young to fly had been left with kin on another ship, and the child had carried the wrench out of a memory of a parent's hand, and the child's child was Rest.
We do not say my people died there. We say they were kept. It is a place the old gear goes quiet. The elders had a word. It does not cross to your speech. But the wrench remembers a hand, and the hand remembers a making, and that is the knowing I carry. Hask is the grief of a hold that flew where the quiet keeps what enters, and did not fly back out.
Yara sat very still. She had charted a place like that. She had marked its center on her own chart, beside the human word no relay, and she had a hand chip in her boot that she had not shown anyone, on which a thing at the center of a kept silence had once, in the only long recording anyone had ever made of it, skipped a single beat. She did not say any of that. It was not right now the thing being given.
I'm hearing it. The name. I'm hearing it.
Then it can be used. A thing heard can be spent. That is also our form.
Then they built. Yara had been wrong about one thing, which she enjoyed being wrong about. She had assumed building a reader meant Rest doing something vast and inscrutable while she handed over tools. It was not that. The pattern Hask carried was a shape, a way of laying down a fine resonant lattice that would ring in sympathy with a frequency far too slow and faint for any certified instrument to bother with. Rest knew the shape. Rest did not know what to build it out of. Out here, with no vast foundry within a month's burn. That part was Yara's.
The pattern wants a fine lattice that holds its shape cold and doesn't drift. I have exactly one source of that out here, and I've been keeping it on a shelf for 4 months because I couldn't throw it away.
She brought down the dead Vask reader, and then she went further than that because the dead reader was small and half-cooked, and she needed mass. She went out the lock in a suit, in the dark, to buoy 8. Buoy 8 had been dead 2 years, overdriven to a husk the night she counted Rest out of the hush, filed as a power transient, the first piece of the chain she had ever spent. It still hung on the line, dark, because she had never had the heart or the order to cut it loose. Inside its charred housing, behind the cooked keep-alive stage, the deep structure of the thing, the inheritance pattern lattice the makers had laid down, older than the reach, older than the buoy's own dead heart, was intact. The makers had built the bones to outlast the organs. She brought a piece of buoy 8 back into the can in both hands like something owed a hearing of its own.
You take the bones of your dead to make a thing that hears.
I take the bones of a buoy I killed reaching you to make a thing out of the bones of your hold so I can hear a clock nobody's supposed to know is there. If you want to tell me that's wrong, now's the time. I'll listen to that too.
A long Vask pause. Rest set the first lattice line into the salvaged structure with a tool off Yara's bench, following the shape that Hask had carried out of a quiet place for 3 generations.
It is not wrong. A wrench remembers a hand. The hand wanted the making used. You are a hand now, Yara Haddad. You have been a hand to me since the dark.
It took the better part of 2 days in the cramped amber of the can, the two of them passing one set of tools back and forth and arguing, gently in 2 registers, the human quick and the Vask slow, about tolerances neither of them could measure, and both of them could feel. They ate standing up out of Yara's stores, Rest finding her ration paste honestly terrible, and saying so in the flat Vask way that wasn't a complaint, just a finding entered for record. The recycler filter sulked. Twice the work lamp browned out, and they kept laying lattice line by the amber of the boards alone, hands working a pattern that wanted feel more than light anyway. Yara provided the mass and the wiring and the human stubbornness. Rest provided the pattern and the long patience of a people who build things meant to be carried, not replaced. Once near the end of the first day, Yara caught herself talking to the half-built reader the way she talked to the buoys, coaxing it, naming the fault in it, and stopped, embarrassed, and found Rest watching her with something that on a human face would have been a small smile, and on a Vask face was just the set of the jaw going easier.
You name your machines.
I live with them. You name your wrench.
We name what we carry. It is the same thing you do. You only pretend it is a habit and not a grief.
Neither of them alone could have made the thing. A reach contractor had the buoy bones and no idea of the shape. A Vask runner had the shape and no foundry. Between them, in a tin can at the edge of charted space, they grew a reader. When it was done, it did not look like anything. It looked like a piece of a dead buoy with a piece of a dead wrench grown into it and a length of Yara's patch cable running off the side. She married it into the spike where its predecessor had lived. She brought it up slow, the way you bring up a thing you do not want to cook in the first minute. Static. The chain's 8 keep-alives, stacked, ordinary. Then she pushed the gain, and under the keep-alives, faint, a shade fainter than she remembered it, came the deep timing. The slow, regular pulse the whole network kept its time to, the conductor at the center of the dark. It was there, not clean. The lattice was wrung from a dead wrench in a dead buoy by a human, and a Vask who could not measure tolerances. And it heard the pulse the way you hear a song through a wall, present, true, blurred at the edges. But it was there. She had a reader again. And the moment she pushed the gain to where she could resolve it, she felt the heat come off the lattice. And she knew, Ress knew, watching the same warmth bloom in the structure, that this one was going to die of being used too, exactly like the last one. The makers had built these to hear once and pay for it. Reproducible now, never durable.
It will not last. The pattern never lasts. To hear the slow thing costs the hearing.
Then I get one good listen and one save. Let's not waste either.
She did the things she'd done for 4, the way you do a thing the second time, faster, with less fear and more respect. She found buoy 5, steady, near, still on the true clock, and she bent its keep alive into exact phase with the deep timing, an honest metronome, loud enough for 6's drifting clock to catch the beat through its own noise. The reader heard the pulse. Yara matched 5 to it by hand, fingers on the key, the warmth climbing off the new lattice the whole time. 6 caught the beat, wide, then less wide, then home. The chain held at 8. She let out a breath she'd been holding for 4 mornings, and she should have shut the reader down right then. She didn't. She let it run the last of itself recording because she would never get this reader to full gain again, and she had questions older than 6. The pulse came in slow and faint and regular, the conductor, the same as 4 months ago. Not the same as 4 months ago. She pulled the hand chip out of her boot, the one nobody had seen, the EP-08 recording, the only long listen anyone had ever made of the deep timing, and she laid the old recording against the new one, beat against beat, and ran them together. They walked apart. Not a skip, not a missed beat, the way the old ship had a missed beat. The interval was longer, fractionally, stubbornly, across 4 months. The gap between one beat of the maker's clock and the next had stretched. The conductor was beating slower than it had been the last time a human heard it. The reader's lattice was glowing now, dying, and Yara watched 2 recordings of a thing at the center of a kept silence drift out of step across a span of months. And she did not say the word that was in her mouth. Ress was watching her face, not the screens. After a while, Ress spoke, and it was not in the formal register, and it was not about the clock.
Among my people, there is the kin other. It is heavy. A naming for life, mourned at death. A death that cannot be set down. I am too young to name a kin other, and you are too strange a shape for it to sit easily. But there is a lighter form, for the young, for the runners. We say a person is near the line, kin adjacent, a hand that is held in the dark, and may be called and will answer. I have carried a debt to you for 2 years, and not said its name. Its name is that. You are near my line, Yara Haddad. The debt is spoken. It does not make us even. It makes us kin near enough.
I counted you out of the dark because nobody else was going to. You came back when I sent one word. I think we were near each other's line before either of us said it.
6's keep alive came in clean the next morning. Square on the beat, the chain whole at 8 again, which was the most a person could ask out here, where whole meant not one fewer than yesterday. The new reader sat on the bench, faintly warm still, the way a thing is warm after it has been used past what it was meant for. It would do 1 more save, maybe 2, and then it would go on the shelf beside the wrench that no longer was a wrench. beside the buoy bone it was grown from. Yara was building a small museum of things that had heard the maker's clock and paid for it. She thought she might keep building it. She thought there might someday be a third reader and a fourth, now that two of them knew the shape. Never durable, always payable, but real. That was the win, and it was a real one. The chain held, and she was not alone with the shape of it anymore. Then she did the thing she had been not doing since the recordings drifted apart. She cued them both, old and new, and played them for Ress, back to back, in the dark of the sleep shift can. The conductor 4 months ago, and the conductor now slower. She waited for Ress to tell her it was instrument error, a reader wrung from a dead wrench in a dead buoy by two amateurs at the edge of nowhere. Of course it ran slow, of course the lattice drifted, of course it was the instrument. She wanted badly for Ress to say that. Ress, who came from people who had flown around the kept places since before the Accord, listened to the two recordings walk apart and looked at the small, warm, dying thing they had built together and did not say it.